Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're continuing with another lesson on Chapter 1, Biodiversity. Once again, I'm Miss Delia, and in today's video, we're going to kickstart with the next long subtopic, which is 1.6, Kingdom Plantae. So this is quite a long subtopic. In this video, we're just going to go through the general stuff, like unique characteristics that are shared by all organisms in Kingdom Plantae. And there will be 4 more videos coming up to look at the 4 groups that we will explore in this kingdom. So later in this chapter, you will go into group bryophytes, group pteridophytes, group gymnosperms, and group angiosperms. Each of these groups will have a video of their own. Okay, with that said, let's continue with the learning objectives for this subtopic. In this subtopic, or at least in this video, the learning objectives are quite simple. I would like you to be able to describe the alteration of generations as the unique characteristics of Plantae, and I hope that you would be able to state the classification of Plantae into 4 groups. Since it's fairly simple, let's keep going. Alright, so let's talk about what are the unique characteristics that are found in organisms in kingdom Plantae. First things first, we already know that plants are multicellular eukaryotes and they are autotrophic. In that it means they produce their own food through photosynthesis. They can do photosynthesis because they contain photosynthetic pigments. In the normal plants that you see, the photosynthetic pigments will be in the leaves or any part that looks green. We know what are these photosynthetic pigments and we gave them names. Example of photosynthetic pigments are chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, xanthophyll, and carotene. When we get to the chromatography experiment in the lab, you will be able to extract these photosynthetic pigments from the leaves that we will give you. Alright, so moving on. Another unique characteristic of Kingdom Plantae is that the cell wall is made up of cellulose. And plants would store their carbohydrate in the form of starch. There is also an alternation of generations in the life cycle of Kingdom Plantae. What is alternation of generations? Alternation of generations means it spends part of its life as a multicellular gametophyte, which is all the cells are haploid, and it spends another part of its life as multicellular sporophyte. So if sporophyte, that means all the cells have diploid number of chromosomes. We will talk a bit more about alternation of generations in the coming slides, so let's be patient about this point. Alright, I'm moving on to another unique characteristic of Kingdom Plantae, which is Plantae would have formation of cell plate during cytokinesis of cell division. So this one you already know, it's from last semester. Plants can reproduce asexually and or sexually, so it depends on the species. Some of them only do asexual, some of them do sexual only, and some of them do both. There are also terrestrial adaptations of plants that enable them to live on land. Okay, so some of these terrestrial adaptations of plants is number 1, they can have a waxy cuticle to reduce water loss. Apa itu waxy cuticle to reduce water loss? Itu adalah laputan, macam ada satu lapis substance cuticle, okay, yang dia macam berminyak, macam lilin, waxy. So dia macam lilin dan ini membolehkan tumbuhan itu tidak terus kering. Okay, so when it's higher temperatures, it's not submerged in water, it doesn't immediately lose a lot of water because that waxy cuticle makes sure that the water stays inside. Okay, so plants can also have stomata for gaseous exchange. So the stomata for gaseous exchange control how much water is being lost, and they also have vascular tissues for transport. All Plantae will have some form of vascular tissues for transport except for group bryophytes. Okay, so when we say vascular tissues for transport, we mean they have xylem and phloem. All right, okay, so now we're going to go into the slide that explains a little bit more about this alternation of generations. So when we say plants show alternation of generations in its life cycle, we mean that there are two separate generations with different numbers of chromosome, which is gametophyte and sporophyte generation. Plants will spend part of their lives in the gametophyte haploid generation and part of their lives in a sporophyte diploid generation. Okay, so this is a diagram that illustrates that as well. You see this one, part of its life is as diploid and another part is as haploid. If you want to, you can go ahead and have a read. When is it called microsporocyte? When is it called microspore? When is it called pollen grain, etc., etc. Okay, again, this is more or less the same diagram, but made more simple. We started with the fertilization between sperm and egg that will produce a zygote. A zygote will become embryo. Embryo will become sporophyte. Okay, and then when it's sporophyte, after some time, it's going to mature. It's going to undergo meiosis to produce spores. Spores will turn into gametophytes. Gametophytes become sperm and egg, and then continue the cycle. Okay, so although we know that there is alternation of generations, it's different across different groups of Plantae. Okay, so example in angiosperm, they have a longer sporophyte lifespan, whereas in groups like bryophytes, they have a longer gametophyte lifespan. So dia bergantung kepada grup, bergantung kepada spesies tumbuhan. Ada yang dia punya gametophyte dominant, ada yang dia punya sporophyte yang dominant. Okay, what you can notice is that both the gametophyte and the sporophyte stages are very different in morphology. So rupa dan bentuk dia semasa gametophyte dan rupa dan bentuk dia semasa dia sporophyte mungkin jauh berbeza. Walaupun dia spesies yang sama dan melekat sebagai satu organisme yang sama. Sporophyte generation. In the sporophyte generation, the plant has sporangium or megasporangium or microsporangium. So these are the organs that will produce spores. Within the sporangium or megasporangium or microsporangium, there are diploid cells that are called sporocytes or megasporocytes or microsporocytes that will undergo meiosis and form the haploid spores. Haploid spores will undergo mitosis and then grow into haploid gametophyte. Whereas in the gametophyte generation, okay, the gametophyte, for example, pollen grain and embryo sac, will produce the haploid male gamete, which is sperm, and the female gamete, which is egg, by mitosis. The male and female gametes will undergo fertilization to form diploid zygote, and the zygote will divide mitotically to produce a multicellular diploid sporophytes. Okay, so this is basically explaining how this diagram looks. Okay, it's just talking about how it goes from this stage to another stage to another stage. Dia macam ikut setiap step dalam diagram ini. Okay, so once again, another diagram to show how we move from sporophyte generation to gametophyte generation and from gametophyte to sporophyte again. For the alternation of generations, you don't need to memorize a lot about it. You can try to remember what it means and maybe the definition. But you don't need to go into like very full detail to explain since you don't have to write an essay about it. Okay, so to conclude the part about sporophytes and gametophytes, we can compare the differences between the two. So what we know is that in gametophyte generation, it's haploid. In sporophyte generation, it's diploid. In gametophyte generation, it will produce male and female gametes by mitosis, whereas in sporophyte generation, it will produce haploid spores by meiosis. Okay, so yeah, that is pretty much it. That's all you need to remember about alternation of generations. And then we go into the final segment in this video, which is I tell you that kingdom Plantae can be divided into 4 main groups. Kalau kamu sadar, group ini, dia bukan termasuk dalam order taxonomy yang kita selalu ikut, okay? It doesn't follow the kingdom, domain kingdom, etc., etc., etc. this group is bigger than phylum but smaller than kingdom. Itu level dia. Kalau sini adalah kingdom, sini group, baru phylum. Dan group ini jarang kita guna lah sebagai classification. Kita lebih suka gunakan dalam kingdom Plantae saja. And this is the only time you'll see the taxon group. Alright, so in kingdom Plantae, we'll focus on group bryophytes, group pteridophytes, group gymnosperms, and group angiosperms. And we will look at each of them in detail in the coming videos. Alright, so just a very quick summary. Please remember that the alternation of generation is a unique characteristic of kingdom Plantae, and there are 4 groups that we will focus on in kingdom Plantae. And that's it. Very short. And what you should do now is just move on to the next video lesson for 1.6 kingdom Plantae. There will be a video for each group of plants. Once again, I'm reminding you. So please remember to come up with your own notes and continue with the lesson itself. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. Happy learning and goodbye.